Welcome to the Code Update presentation covering the interim Chapter 1 amendment to the existing 2019 OSSC. I'm Tony Rocco, and I'm the Division's Structural Program Chief. I've been with the Division since 2011 and have worked full-time in the Oregon construction industry since 2002. I'll be guiding us through the presentation and touching on important considerations along the way. And with that, let's get started. The administrative provisions of both the OSSC and ORSC have been updated and are mandatorily applicable throughout our state as of April 1. On the OSSC side, the updated chapter is an interim amendment to the current 2019 OSSC. This amendment replaces the existing published chapter in its entirety. Laura from our technical team has formatted these amendments into insert pages for user convenience. They are available on our Division webpage under the Commercial Code Program page. While not specifically included in this presentation, Chapter 1 of the ORSC is incorporated into the 2021 iteration of the code. This chapter is available through both the Code Update page and the Residential Code Program page, accessible through our Division website. Additional details regarding the ORSC specific updates are incorporated into the associated Code Update training video, which is also available through the program page and the certification renewal page. Our division has been working with our local government partners, advisory boards, and other stakeholders on updating and aligning these administrative provisions since 2018. The specific updates captured by the new chapters have been shared broadly since September of 2020. A big thanks to all of those involved, and specifically for the input and feedback provided by OBOA, the Division Advisory Boards, and the technical staff at the Office of the State Fire Marshal. This presentation covers multiple summary concepts in addition to a brief walkthrough of the corresponding code language. Together we will cover scoping policy centered around the may and shall statements of our enabling statute, the doctrine of occupied field and the deference to local policymakers, the Division's delegable authority, local ordinance allowances were not preempted by the provisions of the State Building Code, and a few specific matters such as utility disconnection, stop work orders, and right of entry. When considering the scoping policy, the following is critical. Unoccupied structures and occupied buildings. The may and the shall statements of 455.020 determine the framework for this policy and approach. Reasonable safeguards for the occupants and users of those occupied buildings apply statewide under the State Building Code. Deference to local policymakers regarding regulation of certain unoccupied structures provides flexibility and local regulatory options. The scoping of Chapter 1 identifies these optional matters. Where regulated locally, the State Building Code provisions will apply. We'll cover this in more detail. When considering this scoping policy, the following illustrative figure may be helpful. Note the two ovals. In the center oval, there are examples of matters that apply statewide under the State Building Code. In the outer oval, we see examples of matters which are deferred to local policymakers for considering community-specific needs of additional regulation. Outside of both ovals are examples of matters completely outside the Division's delegable authority and not regulated by the State Building Code. We'll come back to this figure shortly after covering the next couple of slides, but I think it's helpful to take a quick look at it. In applying the doctrine of occupied field, the intent of the legislature is presumed to be deference to local conditions, whether urban or rural. When the text of a preemption clause is susceptible to more than one plausible reading, the Division relies on the plain reading that establishes maximum flexibility. By drawing a distinction between the shall and may statements, the legislature has provided an opportunity for local delineation based on local conditions for those certain unoccupied structures. It's important to note that both the shall and the may categories fall under the division's regulatory scheme. While providing for local delineation in the may category, all work identified in either of the two ovals on the following slide and that which we reviewed previously must comply with the respective construction standards of the State Building Code. Local policymakers review local conditions, and who better to make community-specific decisions? What's reasonable in Harney County may not be reasonable in the Portland metro area. Only local officials using that local knowledge can pragmatically apply the reasonable test of ORS 425020 for these unoccupied structures. To expand our review of this figure, let's note the following together. The two ovals shown fall under the division's authority. The shall oval, or the center oval, outlines examples of matters which are governed statewide under the State Building Code. This includes occupied buildings, reasonable safeguards for those building occupants, accessibility for affected buildings, as further defined in ORS 447, and any associated construction, reconstruction, alteration, or repair of buildings. The may oval, or the outer oval, lists matters which fall under the division's authority but are deferred to local policy makers. This includes historically low hazard and customarily non-occupied or non-occupiable structures, such as freestanding tanks, fences other than those required swimming pool barriers, freestanding flagpoles, landscaping retaining walls unrelated to buildings, and small equipment-only weather shelters. Regulation of these items is deferred to local policymakers and elected officials, providing flexibility for them to address any community-specific goals or needs through additional local regulation of one or more of these items. As we will see in the associated code language, many of these items have guiding parameters that must be considered where additional local regulation is desired. We'll touch on that in more detail later on in the presentation. The most important consideration here is that since both of the ovals fall under the division's authority, the applicable construction standards of the State Building Code will apply accordingly. Outside of both ovals, we see items falling completely outside the division's delegable authority. Authority for several of these items is specifically reserved for local government, such as the abatement of nuisances and dangerous buildings, local seismic rehabilitation plans and programs, and driveways. Any municipality may have independent local authority for other listed matters where not otherwise preempted, but any local authority would simply not be derived through our division's delegation of authority. Delegable authority is an important and often overlooked consideration when analyzing the content of the State Building Code. While the advisory boards generally elect to follow nationally promulgated model codes, specifically the IBC and IRC, for creation of the OSSC and ORSC, respectively, there is an ongoing effort to verify that any adopted model provisions fit within the division's regulatory paradigm. For example, demolition is not encompassed by the division's authority, but is absolutely part of the national model. The same can be said for encroachments into the public right-of-way, fire safety during construction, grading unrelated to site construction standards or building foundations, and similar matters. Where there is desire to regulate these matters locally, any local consideration should be determined in accordance with guidance from local legal counsel. Since the authority for these matters is not derived through division delegation, the provisions of the State Building Code are not mandatorily applicable, but may be referenced by the municipality voluntarily. Nothing in the State Building Code limits a municipality's ability to enact or enforce its own ordinances, except where specifically preempted by the provisions of the code. The division is unable to deem any and all possible local ordinances as legally sufficient within Chapter 1, but has added clarifying language throughout the chapter to detail municipal ordinance allowance. Municipalities have flexibility in how they administer the State Building Code under their program delegation. Building officials are afforded broad and flexible discretionary authority, including authority to interpret the code, create policies, and streamline local review procedures for the benefit of customers. Where a municipality wishes to require something different than what the provisions of the State Building Code specify, ORS 455-040 and the associated administrative rule can be reviewed for additional details on requesting a local amendment approval from the division. As a recurring statement, our division always recommends that any and all local ordinances are thoroughly reviewed by local legal counsel. Here is the first of several more specific topics captured by the updated Chapter 1 language. The administrative clarifications, including these items, are a result of direct legal guidance. First, we have utility service disconnection. The division does not have delegable authority regarding the disconnection of fuel lines or utilities, even in an emergency. Local municipalities may have independent local authority outside of the authority delegated by the division regarding the disconnection of fuel lines and utilities. Of course, regulated appliances governed by the State Building Code and covered under an active permit are subject to building official approval. Next up, we have stop work orders. The division's statutory authority regarding stop work orders is not delegable to a local municipality. Local municipalities likely have independent local authority outside of the authority delegated by the division regarding stop work orders. It is recommended to work closely with local legal counsel when determining independent local authority. Up next, we have right of entry. While this is not a specific departure from the first printing of the 19 OSSC, it is still a common question. Municipalities may have specific right of entry authority, possibly in conjunction with any local authority regarding dangerous buildings. The division does not have delegable authority regarding access or right of entry. These model provisions were removed during the publishing of the 2019 OSSC prior to October 2019. Occupied buildings that do not have a valid certificate of occupancy do not fall under the delegated authority from the division. References within the State Building Code that provide access and investigative authority to building officials are rescinded and are not valid. We've now made it to our walkthrough of the associated code provisions. The matters we covered early, which fall into the may category, or the outer oval from the previously reviewed figure, are identified in 101.2.1 as optional local adoption matters. This has been tied to building permit requirements and also linked to those items exempt under Section 105. Since the items listed under Section 101.2.1 fall under the may authority of the statute, where a local municipality chooses to require permitting of any of these items, the standards of the State Building Code apply. The construction standards will be predictable for these matters statewide. It will be important to review the entire list of may adopt items and the associated guiding parameters when considering local inclusion via ordinance or exclusion as so promulgated. The following subsection, 101.2.2, identifies those matters that do not fall under the authority delegated by the division. Some of these matters may be published in the National Model Code and municipalities may have independent local authority to regulate one or more from the list where not otherwise preempted. It would simply be through independent local authority as further determined by local legal counsel. Here's a closer look at those matters falling outside of our division's delegable authority. Again, this list is located in section 10122 and includes local seismic rehabilitation plans, dangerous building ordinances, P-row encroachments, construction located in P-row, demolition, dams and levees, which are typically preempted by federal regulation, transitional housing accommodations, and mechanical equipment not specifically covered by the provisions of the State Building Code. As we covered together previously, the State Building Code is unable to somehow deem any and all possible local ordinances as legally sufficient. Note the strikeout language here in the examples provided. Also note the additional language intending to clarify that broad local ordinance abilities exist, and that the State Building Code does not further limit those local ordinances beyond ORS 455-040. This is simply a quick navigational slide for utility service disconnection and stop work orders. While these matters are not under the authority of the division, municipalities may have independent authority as further determined by local legal counsel. The text boxes shown appear in both the OSSC and ORSC, Chapter 1. Consistent with the broad and flexible discretionary authority afforded to the local building official, new language has been added throughout Chapter 1 to serve as a useful reference. This language was adjusted with input from OBOA and the City of Portland and is summarized as follows. Any modifications permitted by the building official may not create an unsafe or dangerous condition regarding fire and life safety, and may not enforce requirements exceeding those prescribed by the State Building Code. As always, approval of an alternate method may include requirements outside those prescribed by the code, as agreed upon with the customer. The key concept here is that fire and life safety is paramount. It's the entire basis and foundation of modern building codes since the early 1900s. There are other mandated requirements such as federal ADA standards that also serve as a baseline minimum. Unrelated matters covered by the code such as convenience toilets, room areas, and similar may be considered under the local discretionary authority on a site-specific basis. As we know, the basic intent of the code can absolutely be achieved without adhering to the exact written word in all instances. And who better to consider achieving that than the local building official and their staff? Finally, additional flexibility has been added in both the OSSC and ORSC to enable local building officials to consider alternate methods for recording permit progress, inspection resulting, and similar. This specific language was adapted from a prior discussion with Randy Scheid of Deschutes County from several years ago. Thanks again for this one, Randy. The basic intent here is that as technology continues to play a larger role in our industry, the historical methods of recording inspections and permits may become outdated in terms of service delivery to our customers. This language does not require the local building official to take any specific action, but simply affords additional flexibility where desired to improve the local process for the citizens served. In closing, here's a quick resource summary for you. Insert pages for the 2019 OSSC Chapter 1 Interim Amendment are available through our commercial program page. Chapter 1 of the 2021 ORSC is also available independently on the residential page, along with the full ORSC update training videos and supplemental documents. This includes a great 85-page document outlining all of the significant ORSC changes from each chapter. A big thanks to Laura Burns from our technical team for all of her efforts on both the web pages and the resources provided. As always, you are welcome to submit inquiries regarding this presentation to the email address listed on the screen. You are also always welcome to contact me and/or any of our technical team members directly. We all enjoy hearing from you, listening to project-specific assessments, and discussing code application. We also enjoy serving as a resource for all of our local government partners and other stakeholders. Hey, all right, we're all done. Thank you for watching the presentation. It's important to provide you all with valuable update training in an efficient manner that is easy to access. I hope it was informative and enjoyable, or not too bad. Have a good rest of your day.